Hi, I'm Carl Sweeney.
And I'm Raquel Stecher, and this is the CineHistorians podcast, where we explore the history of cinema from across the globe.
So we're going to do something slightly different, which is that we've come to the end of this season about the Sight and Sound list from 2022. We've covered 8 films from that list in great detail, I would say, over this podcast series.
Yes.
But we wanted to leave you with some recommendations. So what we're both going to do is reel off a few of these. I think 4 each, right? So
yes.
Raquel's going to go first, and I'm going to go second. And we've arranged this so that I don't think we're going to get any kind of shared choices. So in other words, everyone listening, if you haven't seen these movies already, you're going to come away with some great homework, some great further viewing to do. Raquel, where do you want to take this first?
So, we both chose 4 movies for this season. So if we were to pick 4 other ones that we would have included in this season, these would be the 4. And just a reminder that all the films we talk about in this episode and all of our episodes are on a dedicated Letterboxd list. So you just go to letterboxd.com/CineHistorians so you can see the full list by episode. So you don't have to write them all down. They're all there for you. My 4 picks, I'll start with the one on the 11th spot, which is Sunrise, A Song for Two Humans from 1927, directed by F.W. Murnau. This is a silent film about a married couple, a farmer played by George O'Brien and his long-suffering wife played by Janet Gaynor. The farmer is having an affair with a city woman and he plans to drown his wife in order to be with the other woman, but he has a change of heart. And what ensues is this trip to the city where the man and wife sort of renew their courtship. There's lots of little mini dates in the city. We see a great contrast between kind of the misery they left behind and the joy they're experiencing now, and they fall in love all over again. He's trying to redeem himself, but this terrible storm appears and threatens to undo it all. And Sunrise is a great example of how far filmmaking had advanced in the silent era. If you compare it with early talking films, you'll see how much the industry had to backtrack, especially with camera work, in order to focus on that sound synchronization. And Sunrise has wonderful cinematography. The camera is moving through the grass and the wetlands or moving through the bustling streets of the city. There's lots of really interesting editing techniques. And it's one of those films that works really well on an emotional level and a technical one, but watching it in a theater with live music is a whole other experience. And I really recommend that. So my second pick is tied for 21st place on the list, and it's Late Spring, directed by Japanese filmmaker Yasujiro Ozu. And it's one of many films Ozu made about the family dynamic. And in this one, Setsuko Hara stars as the daughter of a widowed father who wants to marry her off, but she has little desire to find a husband. And it's a beautiful, very gentle film about many things, about familial obligation, about intergenerational relationships, loss, the role of women in society, expectations, and also ultimately the independence and a woman's agency too. And this is all within the context of post World War II Japan. And you see this in other films. Ozu's work is how the young people are driving sort of this cultural shift that's happening, which is really interesting. There's also a lesbian subtext in Late Spring that I find quite interesting, which you also see in Early Summer from 1951, and Late Spring, Early Summer by name obviously go well together, but they also pair together nicely by theme too, because they're kind of about the same thing. So I would recommend both Late Spring and then Early Summer if you wanted to watch both. My third pick, tied for 25th place, is The Night of the Hunter from 1955, directed by Charles Laughton. This is a masterpiece. I love this film, and it's a shame that it was panned at the time because Laughton never went on to direct another film. Night of the Hunter is ahead of its time, and we lost that opportunity for a nice body of work from Laughton. So this film stars Robert Mitchum. He's this deranged preacher who kills people. There's his voice in his head telling him what to do, and he thinks it's God. And he learns from a fellow inmate that there's some stolen money and that the guy's children have it. So the preacher goes down to hunt the children, woos and marries their mother, played by Shelley Winters, and then meets his match with this older lady who protects the neighborhood children, played by Lillian Gish. Amazing performances, Mitchum, Winters, Gish, all amazing. Stunning camera work. really creepy imagery. The music in it, the use of music in it is really haunting. Lots of really great work with shadows. And it's very influential, like the love hate knuckles that Robert Mitchum's character has love tattooed on one set of knuckles and hate on the next set of knuckles. And he holds that up to the camera, and that becomes very iconic, which leads me to the next movie, which is on the 24th spot, which is Do the Right Thing from 1989, directed by Spike Lee. And in that film, there's also a character with love hate knuckles. It's Radio Raheem, and he wears gold rings with the love hate knuckles. Just like my segue there, I got to tie those in. Do the Right Thing is one of the great modern films about race, set in Brooklyn, New York. It's about the tensions between this Italian-American family that runs this pizza place, and the majority of their customers are like Black people. It's about racism, oppression, how an urban setting like exacerbates those social tensions. And Spike Lee plays the main character, who's sort of like a liaison between the different communities in this story. Amazing cast: Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee, Danny Aiello, John Turturro, Rosie Perez, that very amazing opening sequence with her too, Samuel L. Jackson. One of my favorite elements of the movie is the Greek chorus. It's like these three men who sit on a sidewalk and they kind of give commentary on what's happening. That's what I love about this movie. It's like Do the Right Thing is very much about the era that it takes place in, but it's classic because it captures this sort of like ongoing issue of racial division, but it's also influenced by classics and like literature and movies. So you kind of have that same thing like with Scorsese. Spike Lee has this really rich knowledge of film, and you see that throughout this movie. So those are my 4 picks.
Fantastic choices as well. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so I've got 4 different picks, and a couple of these were kind of inspired by the fact that we had talked about Goodfellas. So I mentioned The Godfather a few times. So I'm going to pick The Godfather, which is 12th on the Sight and Sound list, I think, in 2022. This is the 1972 film by Francis Ford Coppola. Just a prime example of the gangster genre, incredibly successful, incredibly influential, which kind of maybe masks the fact that it probably seemed a bit of an atypical gangster film when it came out in 1972, because if you watch older gangster movies from the 30s or something, they often have a kind of really brisk like efficiency. Like The Public Enemy is like an hour and 20 minutes long or something. Of course, The Godfather has this epic scope. It's just under 3 hours long. The Godfather Part 2 is closer to 3.5 hours, I think. The other thing that I think is very interesting is that if you look at older gangster films, they often have this kind of level of moral anger about the fact that our society has gangsters. And this is kind of different because this is now the 1970s. So we're kind of in the era of, it's like post-Vietnam, it's post-Watergate, and some of those old certainties are breaking down. So when you actually see Michael Corleone in The Godfather, and he's coming up against policemen and businessmen and politicians in these films, I think there's kind of a dramatic irony there that actually all of these people are as crooked as one another. It isn't just the gangster. It's like everybody is morally suspect, So great gangster film. I'm sure most people listening have seen The Godfather. If not, I would urge people to check it out straight away.
And it does not insist upon itself. It's a good movie.
Yeah. The other kind of connection with Goodfellas is because I knew I was going to talk about the De Niro-Scorsese partnership. And then I looked down the list on Sight and Sound, and I noticed that at 15th place was John Ford's film The Searchers. And of course, John Ford and John Wayne, another very fruitful director-actor partnership. In the mid-50s, so a time when some Western films were taking on this new level of like psychological complexity. So if you look at some of the films that Anthony Mann directed with James Stewart, for example, that would be another case. You can read this as an attempt to take John Wayne's screen persona and give it a new level of darkness, because the story is about this raid on a family of white settlers. A young girl called Debbie is kidnapped, and then there's a quest to retrieve the girl. It develops into this kind of odyssey where Ethan Edwards, played by John Wayne, and Martin Pauly, played by Jeffrey Hunter, spend years of their lives trying to find Debbie. And I think it's a fascinating film because John Ford and John Wayne were actually quite willing to create a very disturbing portrait of hatred. I think it's a film that captures a lot of the dark side of America, actually, that there's a lot of tribalism and racial hostility in the film.
Right.
And it's not just that the lead character played by John Wayne is racist and hateful for most of the movie, it's that those sentiments are actually held by other characters too. So in some respects, it makes some quite powerful statements. At the same time, I don't think John Ford was exactly a 21st century progressive. There are things in the film that a contemporary audience would take issue with in some ways, but it adds up to a very fascinating portrayal. And still, I think a film with a lot to say. So that's my second pick, The Searchers. Like I say, 15th on that list. Then I'm going to choose Jane Campion's film from 1993, The Piano. Is equal 50th on the 2022 list, I think. A film that made a real impression. It was nominated for Academy Awards. It won 3 of them, including Best Actress for Holly Hunter. Shared the Palme d'Or at Cannes. And in 2019, there was a critics poll to name the best films ever directed by women by the BBC, and The Piano was first place on that poll. The story is about a mute woman from Scotland called Ada, played by Hunter, who travels to New Zealand for an arranged marriage, but is more drawn to a neighbor of the man she's due to marry, played by Harvey Keitel. We'd talked previously, this film is from New Zealand, we had talked previously about the Australian New Wave, and I think a recurring problem for films over time from both countries is, like, how do you stay true to the country itself whilst trying to crack the overseas market, which often is like what some of these films need to do, ideally, because they have some things like a really stunning natural landscape, which international audiences might be drawn to. And then there have been other aspects like dialect, which haven't always been felt to travel well. And you get films from Australia and New Zealand being redubbed for American audiences and so on. The Piano is a very interesting film because it really skillfully navigates some of those perceived problems. And it became a critical and commercial success, and it has has recognizable American performers, and it's relatively dialogue light because Holly Hunter's character is mute. And I don't know, it's Jane Campion trying to bridge the divide between like the art house and the mainstream, and doing it very successfully. She hasn't always been able to do that successfully. So I think a fascinating film is the film of Meg Ryan she made, In the Cut. But it really I think it's a really interesting film, but it repelled the mass audience at the time. Here's an example that worked much more immediately, much more successfully. So The Piano is my third choice, and my final choice is Buster Keaton's film Sherlock Jr. from 1924, equal 54th on the Sight and Sound list. This is the film in which Keaton plays this kind of like mild-mannered cinema projectionist who would quite like to be a private detective, and he's kind of vying for the affections of a woman, but there's another man in the picture, and the other guy kind of frames Keaton for the theft of a watch, and basically this guy doesn't seem to be having much luck. However, he falls asleep, he enters this fantasy world where he seems to enter the world of the cinema and becomes a renowned detective called Sherlock Jr. So I don't know, if there's a more purely entertaining film on that Sight and Sound list, I'm not sure I've seen it, because this is like it's just 45 minutes long, and it's basically 3/4 of an hour very well spent, so
yeah.
The first part of the film is a lot of fun. There's some great laughs, but then it kind of really takes off into the stratosphere once it introduces that fantasy element I mentioned. And it's a very inventive and clever film, and actually still very technically impressive now. And it's over 100 years old now. And there are scenes here where like actually finding out how the effects were achieved is still really remarkable. And I don't know, it's just a joy. Is Sherlock Jr. There are scenes in the film, like there's a motorbike chase, which I just think is fantastic, but I think I could genuinely watch on a loop like every day and just never get bored of watching it, basically. So I wanted to put in like a pure slice of entertainment as my final pick, basically. So yeah, Raquel, those are my 4 choices, basically.
Those are great choices.
You can find the CineHistorians at cinehistorians.com and on X, Letterboxd, and YouTube at CineHistorians.
If you're interested in supporting the show, please consider leaving us a Ko-fi. You can find our Ko-fi link and all of our other links in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and happy viewing.